What does your saddle sit on? Yeah, your saddle sits on a horse, but what are the different components of your horse that you are sitting on? And why is it important to make sure that we're sitting on certain aspects and not others? Let's get to it. So the different parts of the horse that are important for us to discuss are comprised of different bones, ligaments, and muscles and nerves. So the first ones we're going to go over are the different bones. So you may think that your horse's spine is up here, right? But it's actually not. I mean, certain parts of it are, but the part that actually holds their spinal cord is way down here. Check this out. So this is a horse's vertebra, and it looks very different from a person's. So this hole right here is actually the part that holds their spinal cord. And then these little doodads here are called facet joints. And these are the parts that connect different aspects of different bones together, right? And so this would be the front to back parts. And this is the orientation that this bone would be. So if we place this up against her here, you can see that the spinal cord is actually way down there. And what's making up all of this space in between is muscle. And we're going to get to that. But some of what makes horses different shapes and sizes is that a horse like this that is more of a sport type horse that has a bit more blood, tends to have a longer dorsal spinous process than a horse that's a short squatty one, like a more stock type. They're going to have a shorter dorsal spinous process. So we can see the difference in those heights there, right? So this is going to be a rounder horse than this one. This is going to need a longer tree point than this horse. This horse is going to need, most likely in a Western saddle, a narrower gullet than this horse, even if they need the same bar angle, okay? We'll get to all of that. But understanding where your horse's bones are is critical in order to make sure that we have the saddle rest where it needs to. Because bones are structural, right? And that is something that your saddle is going to constantly seek. It wants to find the ground. It's not going to be able to eventually find the ground, I hope. So the next best thing that it is going to find is your horse's bones. So let's start by finding bones. So the first bone that we're going to find together is a horse's scapula. So the scapula is kind of a funny thing because when we look at it here on the horse, it looks like it's way bigger than it actually is. So the scapula is a triangular bone. It's like this. It looks kind of like an ice cream cone. But this top part here is actually made out of cartilage and it's a little bit flexible. That doesn't mean that we can disrespect it though. So even though it's triangular like this, we want to find the back of that scapular ridge using our fingers and find where that back edge is. And we're going to draw that. Okay. Now, an interesting thing that you can do as an exercise for yourself too is to find how does that scapula move in space, like in motion. So I'm going to pick up this front leg. And I'm going to extend it forward. Oh, big stretch. Oh my goodness. Okay. Extend that forward and see how far back it goes. Okay. Really not as far as you'd think, right? Like a lot of times people are like, oh, it goes way back there. Not really. What was that, like maybe an inch? Let's take it the other direction. Why not? Oh, goodness. I know. There. So that's basically the full range of motion of the scapula. And this is like a mid to upper level sport horse. So she's got pretty awesome range of motion. So now we have an idea of one bone, right? That's our scapula, our shoulder blade. Now remember when I was showing you the vertebrae, how far down that the actual spinal column was and where those facet joints were? That is how far down that the rib cage actually starts. So we're also going to palpate where the rib emerges out. So I'm going to palpate through all of the little smushies, and I'm going to feel for where I can feel something a bit more structural. This is called the rib emergence or the rib shelf. That is what my tree is going to constantly try to find, that rib cage. And you can see as she breathes that it kind of expands and contracts. Interestingly enough, if you watch closely, you'll notice that it's really from here back that tends to expand and contract the most. And that's because it's these ribs that are not connected through the sternobrae, so they have more ability to expand and contract. These have the ability to expand and contract here, where these are kind of fixed together more, so they have more mobility. So we also want to find, like, where do the ribs end? Do they go all the way to the hips? No, they don't. So we want to find her last rib. So I'm going to palpate here through the smushies of her guts. I'm going to palpate. And sometimes on some horses they'll have what's called a false rib, where the lumbar will form some stabilizers as they age. Sometimes will even overlap. So I recommend palpating for the 18th rib on both sides for accuracy. So on her, she actually has what feels like a bit of a stronger abdominal muscle, I know, right here. So here's her 18th rib, and I'm going to follow that up. And I'm going to give you a little trick to find that 18th rib. You know how horses have hair that comes all down to a point? On a lot of horses, all of that hair comes down to a point at the same location and trajectory as the 18th rib. So if you're never 100% sure as to where that last rib is, you can kind of look at that to see if you're in the right place. So now we've got a general idea of like where our bone zone is. We know that we have our dorsal spinous processes up here. We have our 18th rib. We have our rib emergence. We have our whole entire range of motion of scapula from standing to full extension, full protraction, right? Okay. So bones are done. Now let's take a look at muscles. So the main muscle that we ride on is called the longissimus dorsi. It is the longest muscle in the horse's body, which makes it a little bit easy to remember. And it travels all the way dorsally. See, I feel like Latin words are so easy to figure out like where stuff is. Along the horse's body. It terminates way back here and it initiates way up here. And so muscles function through contraction and relaxing, and they have one on either side. So what that muscle does is it allows the horse's body to go right. So it's a locomoting muscle. And what it does is it helps initiate the locomotion this way. Legs are just amplifiers of locomotion. If your horse doesn't have function of their longissimus dorsi, they don't have locomotion, right? They'd have to be completely rigid through here and rely this way. Like if you've ever tried to function without your back, you look kind of silly, right? You need to be able to function through your longissimus as well. But this is the main muscle that we sit on, and it's huge, big, thick muscle. We think of looking into this horse's body, going straight in this way, straight down this way. That's a big old meaty piece, right? That's a lot to support. So this is the long, I'm sorry, I know that tickles. Dorsi. All right. Now coming up the rear, we have what's called the medial glute. And the medial glute actually terminates right here. This is your powerhouse muscle. And it kind of works the same way as like if your friend was running out in front of you and you said, no, don't go. This is your sit muscle, right? It pulls this way from behind. It pulls the whole entire front end up. Really, really big, powerful muscle. Massive, massive, massive muscle here. And it terminates right at the back of your sow. So a lot of times when horses are getting lower back soreness, it's because they've been using their medial glutes a whole lot. And this part right here, this junction, has gotten sore. Now those two muscles overlap over what's called the gluteal tongue. And it does. It looks just like a tongue that's laying over top. And that connection is just through a little layer of fascia. So if there's been a whole lot of work happening here, you can have some little micro tears there in the fascia that can make that uncomfortable for a horse. All right, gluteal tongue. We'll put this, this is a glute. All right, so that's a muscle that we're sitting on. Underneath all of this, we have to use our X-ray vision. We have a little teeny tiny muscle called the multifidus. Multifidus. All right, so the multifidus does something really cool. Multifidus lays way down here and make sure that all of this stuff doesn't fall apart on the dorsal side. Okay? We talked about there being locomotive muscles and stabilizer muscles, so this multifidus is stabilizing. It allows the longissimus to do its job properly. Now, getting a little bit higher up again. Another one that you can palpate externally is the trapezius muscle. The trapezius muscle you can palpate coming down the scapula, and you'll feel the lower ridge of it, and you can follow that diagonally up. And the trapezius muscle is very, very thin and delicate. I want you to think of it as being like Scotch tape. It helps, sure, it helps with this protraction and retraction of the scapula, but if you didn't have a trapezius muscle, the scapula would just fall right off. So it's really important that it stays nice and healthy. But it's also very thin and delicate. Her trapezius muscle is no thicker than my pinky. It is very, very thin. So we don't want anything to terminate on the trapezius muscle because that would be very detrimental to her body. Now there's another muscle deep within all of this that is very important to a horse's orientation and stabilization, and that is the spinalis muscle. And so the spinalis muscle helps with stabilization of the mid-neck all the way to the mid-back. It starts at C4, which is the widest vertebrae in the horse's neck. And how many vertebrae does a horse have? It's C4? Okay, mid-neck. Gotcha. And then it terminates mid-back. And when she flexes and moves her head, all of this that you see here see that move? That's her spinalis. That's her spinalis going to work. You can have your cookie. So that lets us know that all of this through here, I wish that this one was working. Yeah, all of this needs freedom to move and expand. If this is impacted, then your horse in their neck has to recruit different muscles for stabilization. Have you ever seen a horse go around like this? right? This under neck muscle is really, really big. They don't have that nice elegant movement to them because the spinalis muscle cannot expand. It can't move, it can't expand and stabilize the neck properly. So instead you have the brachiocephalicus having to stabilize the neck and get all meaty, right? Now the other impacts that happen with that is that when a horse has to recruit the improper muscles for locomotion, they also have a chemical response in their body. It releases stress chemicals, and it's not fun. So saddle fit can affect their mental well-being, even from those sort of aspects of it's just physiological, this and that. So we kind of have a rectangle here going on with a little bit of a triangle of a no-no zone that we want to be able to keep clear. And it doesn't mean that nothing can go in this area, but we want to make sure that this area is soft, okay? We want to make sure that this area here has room to where if I were to like reach my hand in there, I could like hide a snack, hide a bag of Cheez-Its, something like that, right? Okay. So our true saddle fitting area, to be able to round this out, we take our static scapula marking. I'm going to go 3 fingers behind that. Notice that that actually is just behind the very, very back of where her scapula reached to. This is our triangle, our rectangle of where we can place the saddle. And then when we're going to look at where our bottom of our tree needs to terminate for our tree points for English saddles, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to the bottom of the trapezius, give it a little bit of extra room. I'm going to draw a box here. There's one extra muscle that we need to pay close attention to because it rests right on top of this little blue ridge here. It's called the iliocostalis. So we talked about how the multifidus kind of connects all of those little vertebrae together deep, deep within. The iliocostalis does the same sort of thing for each one of your ribs. So iliocostalis is So when I'm looking for tree points, if I'm doing this with a bare tree, if it comes all the way to my blue line, I'm not very concerned because once I build that out into a saddle, it's going to be lifted up. But if it is in a made saddle, meaning that it has panels, it has skirting, it has what have you, that's going to be too long and that's going to damage that little teeny tiny muscle there. Anything that's tiny is easily damaged. It's a little delicate little baby. We need to be careful with it, okay? So we've talked about bones, we've talked about muscles. We haven't really talked about like ligaments or nerves at all, have we? So let's look at that. There's a ligament that runs smack dab in between her ears, all the way to her tail. Now it has a name change, just like some places change names. Somewhere around in this zone. You've probably heard of the nuchal ligament, right? I know, there was a lot of drama about it on the internet a couple of years ago. But you've probably never heard of the supraspinous ligament. Supra meaning superior, on top. Spinous meaning spine. It's a ligament that runs on top of your horse's spine. Nuchal ligament becomes supraspinous ligament and runs over top here. So it's your connector of everything through here. We want to make sure, especially because if you've ever had a horse tear a suspensory, strain a suspensory, that's a very common injury that at least horse people have heard of. You know it is a long recovery, and a lot of horses never return to 100%. That's because ligaments don't have a lot of circulation. Circulation is how the body gets nutrients to an area to be able to heal it. Which means that if you damage a ligament, you have permanently damaged that body to a certain extent. We want to be very, very conscientious of what we do around ligaments. You do silly, funny stuff around muscles and muscles that will forgive you. That doesn't mean that we can be all hooty-ba-dooty with them. But it does mean that, like, if this horse had a mistake in her past, her muscles will forgive me. And it may take 6 years, it may take 6 months, who knows, but at least I can make somewhat of a decent recovery with that, within reason. If something comes over and goes, whoosh, it's never going to be 100% again. We need to be conscientious of that. So there always needs to be ligamentous clearance. For most horses, their supraspinous ligament is about 3 fingers width. Now, if you want to get super technical with it, you can come in here and palpate it, especially on a little delicate lady like this. You can see that she flinches and she will tell me where it is. But this is a pretty decent rule of thumb. Now, your big old meaty draft horses, they're probably going to need something a bit wider. Little teeny tiny ponies can handle something a little bit narrower. We want to make sure that we're providing adequate clearance for these ligaments. If you go too wide, what will happen is that then everything will just crash down and then you'll just have ligament pressure again. So there can be such a thing as too much of a good thing. Don't go too bonkers. Now, nerve-wise, one of the main things that I like to talk about is that there is a main nerve down. I know I'm good at finding it. There's a main nerve down here. You may have noticed that your horses tend to be a little bit ticklish down here. Easiest way to find this main nerve is that nerves, veins, and arteries, they all follow together. They follow the same little superhighway. And the superficial thoracic vein is pretty easy to see. Are you gonna show us your superficial thoracic vein today? My old pre-St. George horse, man, his would pop out like nobody's business. All right. So here's her superficial thoracic vein. It runs right along here, which means that this is where her main nerve line is as well. Now, a lot of horses that are girthy, it's because they don't like a whole lot of pressure on that nerve. Same way that, like, you don't like getting whacked in the funny bone. It's not a pleasurable experience. Exactly. So there's lots of different specialty girths, both English and Western, that completely avoid pressure here on the superficial thoracic vein. I personally like some from Wow. The free space girth, both English and Western, are the ones that I personally use right now. But there's tons of different brands out there that offer clearance in this area. Correct Connect makes some for both English and Western as well that are a bit more affordable, that you can use that are going to offer some relief in this area. So if you have a girthy horse, explore some girthing options that have relief in this area. Overall, this is the basic anatomy that we need to focus on in order to make sure that we are being happy and humane with our horses to provide structural support and make sure that we're not going into any of the no-no zones.